Hello, this is Cal Newport. The purpose of this video is to show you the primary productivity systems I use to organize my work. Now notice I used the word primary, and that's because I have a large rotating set of different experimental plans or rituals or ideas that I might be deploying at any one moment, and to try to show you all of those might be confusing and make this video much longer than your patience will allow. So what I want to do today is focus on the three main systems that I've consistently used for years and is probably responsible for 90% of my actual professional productivity. So let's start with the first of these systems, which is how I organize my tasks. So the things that are on my plate, the things that need to be done. The system I use for this is a web-based service called Workflowy. Right, workflowy.com. It's a free service. There's also a premium version that has more features. Now, those of you who have read How to Become a Straight-A Student or Early Study Hacks post know that I am a big fan of reducing friction in productivity systems. I like especially electronic systems to be as simple as possible. The more that I have to conform what I'm doing to a particular set of forms or drop-downs or icons or buttons, the more frustrated I'm going to get and the more likely I am going to abandon the system. So what I really like about workflowy.com is that it's incredibly simple. All it is lists that can be indented. So for example, these are the lists I use to keep track of my tasks. You can see personal, Georgetown, writing, because I'm in the middle of book publicity process right now. I have a separate main list for publicity for digital minimalism. I also, for now, am keeping my blog post ideas in this particular system as well. Now, I don't want to actually expand these particular lists for privacy's sake. I don't want you to actually see everything that's on my plate, but just to show you how this tool works, let's add a new list. So we can call this something like demo work tasks. In the system, you just press enter and you get another bullet point. If you want to indent under a list, you just press tab. So now I might capture some tasks here. Mail, let's say mail checks, and then maybe, whatever. Let's make things up. And so on, right? So this creates a list. We can collapse it or make it big again. Each of these would be tasks. If I want a project, I can simply indent at another level. Right, and now that's a project with individual tasks under it, which I can collapse when I'm not actually working on it. And this is basically how I keep my tasks. I can type as fast as I want. I sometimes leave notes to myself. I'll use this notation. Say something like, remember every day to follow a new marketing plan or something like this, right? So I can leave myself notes. Oftentimes when I have a project, I'll put a description. I'll just leave myself, notes about this project, like what is it, what's it supposed to be. It's very flexible. This is what I really like about Workflowy. I have tasks. I can put notes. It doesn't try to keep track of what's what. I know what's what because I'm the ones who wrote it. So then when it comes time for me to actually figure out what I want to work on in a given week, what I tend to do is use the tag feature. So one of the nice things about this is I go through my tasks at the beginning of a week, and I might want to figure out which of the tasks I would really like to get done this week. I can take those and give them a tag, such as this week, which I do by just putting a hashtag. So maybe the checks is important, and going to the store is important, and on the website project, maybe the first bit of the website project is important. Once I've tagged things, now when I come back to do task blocks, and we'll get into what that means in a second, but when I come back to work on my shallow task, I can just click on that tag anywhere it shows up, and Workflowy will show me just the tasks that have that tag. And there we go, very quickly. I can see the things I'm supposed to be working on, and when I complete a particular thing, I click complete. Okay, so this is mainly what I use to keep track of my obligations, tasks, and projects. A couple subtle points. If something is due on a given day, or if I have an important deadline, I tend to put that on my calendar instead of in this task system. So when I'm looking at my calendar for a week, I'll see what is due. Sometimes if there's a general time frame in which something needs to get done, but not a particular day, I'll do something like this, by end of January, right? That's the convention I use. So then when I'm going through my tasks at the beginning of a week, I can see that some of them have a sort of informal time range label, which might inform me about whether or not I want to make that something that I want to complete in the given week. Okay, so this is how I keep track of my tasks. It's very flexible. The format's very flexible. The friction is very low. I can work with it very quickly. I can add things. I can modify things. I can add notes. It's also very easy for me to pull out which things I want to actually do in a given week. So that's how I keep track of my tasks. The next thing that's core to my productivity systems is the weekly plan. So I mentioned when talking about my task system that I'm going through these tasks at the beginning of each week and trying to figure out which ones do I want to get done this week. Well, that's part of a larger weekly planning process. Now, my weekly planning process I do usually just in a blank text file. I actually have this file on my desktop called Working Memory. Longtime Study Hacks users might know that I love having blank text files as an aid for any sort of productivity or other type of work process, because you could type notes into the text file, getting them out of your working memory, and therefore, in essence, expanding what you can hold in your head. Well, this is particularly important in building a weekly plan, because when you're trying to figure out what you want to do for a week, there are often lots of different variables that you have to keep track of. Things you have, deadlines, projects, systems, tasks, all these different types of things are all floating around that all have to be integrated into a good weekly plan. Almost certainly there's going to be too many elements to just keep them all in your head. So using a text file is a great way to do it. In fact, my two-step method for making a weekly plan is I usually will take a blank text file and I'll divide it into two sections. Just adjust this here. Okay, so the first section, it's literally, I call it buffer. This is really just an extension of my working memory. And what I do is I go through everything. So I go through my task list, I clean it up from the week before, and I label what task I think would be important to get done this week. So that's important. But then I'll go through my calendar, and I'll look at my calendar, and often I'll have reminders to myself on the calendar, or I'll have key deadlines, and I might just start dropping stuff, into this buffer. Right, so things like this. As I go through my calendar and see specific things happening on specific days, I start filling in the weekly plan below. So I might, right, so I'm actually starting to fill in the big things I see on my calendar in the weekly plan section below. So I'm sort of filling in. Right, so at this point I'd be looking at my calendar and I'm actually starting to transfer things over to the weekly plan. I like to have the actual scheduled things in the weekly plan. I'll go through my inbox at this point. I typically go back down to inbox 0 while I'm doing my weekly plan. And in doing so, some things might pop up. And again, just to go quickly, I'll just add these things as like tasks pop up, for example, in my email or I'm reminded of things. I'll just throw them in the buffer for now. So, here I might have, get back to John. So maybe there's some email I need to respond to. Right, so things pop up in that. Again, I'm just dumping stuff in the buffer while also going through my calendar and filling in what's happening on different days. I usually maintain, as longtime readers know, I'll have maybe a research plan and a writing plan that gives me my structure for what's my current plan for, say, the current semester for my Georgetown research, what's my current plan for the current month or two on, say, my writing projects. And so these notes fall in here as well. So that's like need to make progress on policy submission. That might have come out of a research plan, or maybe would have been a note on my calendar. Maybe you'll see something below like finish research for chapter 1. So maybe my writing plan has me really needing to finish that particular research this week. All this just gets dropped into the buffer, okay? So it's this gather phase. I've gone through and cleaned up all my tasks. I've gone through my calendar, have filled out, I've written down specifically what I'm doing each day. I've taken reminders and deadlines off the calendar. I've cleaned out my inbox and I've dumped everything, every action that's generated into here. And then I go through and we clean everything up. So when cleaning up the buffer, a couple different things can happen. One, some of these things might just get taken off of the buffer and added to my task system. And maybe some of them get the this week tag, maybe some of them don't, but those get cleared out. And some of these things, which like are specific tasks that have deadlines this week, or specific projects I need to make progress for, I'll actually now go through my weekly plan and start tentatively figuring out when I'm going to do these type of things. So maybe I look at Monday and say, well, I have this 9:30 call and then lecture at 12 o'clock. And so maybe I'm going to try to finish the recommendation letters, and there's going to be a good time to do it. Then I look at Tuesday and say, I don't really have anything till 2. I really want to take advantage of that. So deep work on so POTSI submission results, right? Like that's a good time to do that. Maybe after the lecture, I'll put shallow block. Like that's usually my terminology for, try to make progress on tasks. Maybe shallow block after this. I'll be pretty tired. I won't have time for deep work, right? So I'm actually essentially in my weekly plan, as I move things out here and into the plan, it's essentially like a rough daily plan for each day, not in like a incredible amount of detail, but I'm really putting, here's the things I actually have to do each day that are on my calendar, and then I'm trying to move around the things that I want to make progress on, the stuff that showed up in my buffer. I'm trying to move those on the days and actually kind of move the puzzle pieces around and see, like, when am I actually going to work on these recommendation letters? What are the actual free times this week where I can make progress on, say, my research? If when I went through my tasks, I see that I have a ton of tasks that need to get done, I might put much more aggressive amounts of time for shallow blocks, for just working through my task list. I might take whole half days or multiple half days or a whole day just to focus on tasks. I don't want the week to be a surprise. I want to know at this stage, here's what's on my calendar, here's what's on my plate, here's my rough configuration for how these things are going to get done. All right, now let's so when I finish this, by the way, I'll have a weekly plan. I'll either print it or I'll send a copy to myself in my email inbox. Obviously, these plans change as the week goes on. That's fine. Just update it and print a new copy or send yourself a new copy. Then we come to the actual day. And when it comes to the actual day, I like to build myself a daily plan that is analog, meaning that it's something that I can carry with me. So I can use this, look at it, and reference it even during the long periods I might be spending away from a computer in a particular day. So when it comes to the actual, I'm in the trenches doing work, I don't want to actually have to use a computer to keep track of what I'm supposed to be doing. Longtime readers know I'm a big fan of black and red spiral-bound notebooks for doing my daily plan. I like them because they're large, the papers are thick stock, so they take ink well without bleeding through, and the spiral and heavy covers means you can lie flat. Okay, so what I'll do for a particular day is I'll actually use 2 pages, right? So if you lay the notebook open, we have a page on the left and the page on the right, and I'll use both of those pages. On the left, I just put a dividing line, divide into 2. On the right, I put the date, I divide it by 2, and I label every other line with an hour. So 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and so on. So I'm corresponding the lines to essentially 30-minute increments. On the right, then, what I do is I actually, using my weekly plan, I build out time-blocked daily plans. So over here, for example, maybe the first hour is for book marketing. Then the next 2 hours of the day, I'm working on a particular set of proofs. Then I have a task block, then a half hour for lunch, and then a 1 hour period for a phone call. Particular notations I like to use, just it helps me when glancing at my schedules, is I tend to do this double wall. So this double-lined wall, if something is administrative, by which I mean shallow, I don't have to concentrate very hard. And I tend to put a thick wall if it's a deep work block. So it's something where I am going to be concentrating without distraction and trying to push my capacity, my cognitive capacity to its limit. It's really good for me just to be able to glance at my days and see, where is my deep work? How much deep work am I doing? How much shallow work am I doing? I also have this convention of putting stars next to appointments. So if I'm meeting with a person, calling with another person, if there's another person involved, I put a star. I don't quite know why I do it. I guess the original motivation was to make sure, hey, you really don't want to miss this because someone else is counting on you being there or picking up the phone. Obviously, once you're used to doing a daily plan, you're not going to forget anything on it because you're using it, but it's just a convention I've had. The reason we split the daily plan page into two halves is that I like to use the right half to elaborate blocks from the left half. So over here, I have this little block that says book marketing. There's not much space in there to give a lot of detail. So what I can do is just draw an arrow to the right side and I can fill in some more detail about what's going on with that block. Another concern people have is what if something changes? So let's say the book marketing takes a half hour longer. Does that mean you have failed? You don't get your gold star for the day for keeping to your daily time blocks without changes? And the answer is, of course not. The goal is not to never change your daily plan. The goal is to always try to have some sort of plan for the time that remains. So the reason I squish these blocks pretty far over to the left of this column is so that if I need to change my schedule halfway through the day, I can just move over a little bit, cross out what's below, and build a new schedule right here. And if I need to change it again later in the day, I can just cross out and build a new schedule over here, right? So I have room to make changes as the day goes on, and changes are common. You get better at this over time. I mean, I've written a lot about time blocking, both on study hacks and in deep work, that one of the things you get good at if you do this is you get much, much better at estimating how much time things really require. So when you first do time blocking, you'll often give yourself way too little time for a lot of things. You'll be building this ideal schedule, where things take the length that you want them to take. And then obviously it takes much more. And so you'll constantly be rewriting your plans. But this is good because it's a pain to rewrite the plan. You have to explicitly confront the fact that the time you thought this was going to take was way too short. And because of that, you get much, much better at estimating how long things take. And you'll end up rewriting these plans much less often. More importantly, when it then comes time to do the bigger picture thinking, such as the weekly planning, you're much more realistic about how much time things actually need. And then once you get much more realistic about how much time things actually need, you start to get much more pragmatic about how early you start things, or how many days you give things, or how many things you allow on your plate. So confronting the actual hours of your plan every day, making a plan and seeing how well it does is the kernel around which is eventually going to grow a much more intelligent awareness of your time and a much more effective planning process, as well as a much more effective attitude towards what's a reasonable amount of things to try to take on and what's too much. So these are simple ideas, but they're meta productivity tips in the sense that they build up to lots of different concrete improvements. So to summarize, my primary productivity system for work is really built around these three things. I build a weekly plan each week, which is more detailed than people are often surprised by how detailed it is. In building this weekly plan, I basically just dump everything into a text file buffer and start working my way through it, moving some things back to calendar, some things to task lists, and some things into the plan, but I'm just grappling with everything on my plate. And I build this weekly plan. In doing so, I look at my calendar, I look at my task systems, then I have that plan. Then each day, I use my black and red analog time block daily plan to actually structure the actual minutes of the day and improve my ability to schedule. Has shown I use Workflowy to actually keep track of all my tasks, to break things into projects, to differentiate what's due, what I want to work on this week and what not. Incredibly low friction, incredibly useful. The thing I didn't show you was just my calendar, but that's pretty straightforward. My calendar plays a really huge role. It not only keeps track of my appointments, but I have a lot of sort of notes to myself. Remember to work on this week. This is due today. There's a deadline next week. So going through the calendar during my weekly plan is really also important as well. I didn't bother showing that because everyone is familiar working with calendars. I use Google Calendar, but you can use whichever type of calendar you prefer. So that's my basic system. I have my weekly planning, my daily planning, and a good system for tracking tasks. I realized there's one thing I forgot to mention, which was when we are looking at the daily plans, what happens over here on the left side, that's just task capture. Okay, so this is where I can capture tasks in David Allen style, get it off of my mind so that it's not an open loop. And at some point, usually by the end of the day or maybe the next day, I try to transfer these into Workflowy or onto my calendar, depending if it's just a generic task or a deadline, so that I don't have to worry about keeping track of tasks in my head, and I have a trusted system for capturing them that I can use even if I'm away from a computer. So I left that piece out. But basically, this is my system. These really detailed weekly plans, a very good task management system, and analog daily planning every day. It allows me to move my time around like chess pieces on a chessboard. I can be very strategic in what I work on when, and it really helps me squeeze not just the most amount of work out of my available time, but really help me do the right work in the right time. The deep work when my concentration is high, the shallow work when my concentration is lower. I might work on a deadline weeks in advance because when I see all the pieces coming together, I realize that's going to be the best time to do it. It really is the foundation of being more of a sort of productivity ninja. So hopefully this was a useful primer to some of the productivity systems I use, and hopefully it gives you some ideas about how to tighten up the workflow in your own professional life.